The inside of the nightclub shimmered with a hazy glow of purple and blue neon lights. The vibrant music pulsed through the crowd in waves. The bass notes were so intense that they shook not only the floor but the very bones in one's chest. Ray's Calderon leaned back against the leather seat in the corner, absent-mindedly spinning his frosted glass with his thumb. His eyes were locked onto the VIP section at the far end of the club. He hadn't come here by choice. An hour ago, armed men had blocked his path in one of the grimy back alleys of the space station, leaving him no alternative. Either he came willingly, or a bounty would be placed on his head. Ray's wasn't in the habit of accepting such invitations, but when it came to Nyx, things were different. Just then, a woman approached the man sitting in the dimmest corner of the club. She moved with effortless grace, her long legs accentuated by a sleek black outfit streaked with metallic gold. Her skin had a subtle violet hue that gleamed under the low lights, and her eyes, oh, those eyes. Eyes that once trusted him, then betrayed him. Nyx. She smiled as she perched herself on the edge of Ray's table, one leg draped lazily over it. The man sprawled in the leather chair raised an eyebrow, giving her an assessing glance. Quite the entrance, Ray's remarked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Unless you're here to shoot me, why am I here? Nyx tilted her head slightly, tapping her fingers on the table with an amused smirk. Shoot you, she echoed. Ray's, if I'd known I'd be seeing you again, I'd have saved my bullets. Her voice was silky smooth, yet lined with concealed thorns. But today, we're here to talk business. Ray's leaned back slightly, lifting his glass to take a slow sip. Let me guess. This is one of those work for me or die conversations. Nyx narrowed her eyes with a knowing grin. Not exactly, but yes, death is on the table. Either you stand with us ... or you become our next job. Ray set his glass down, shaking his head. I expected you to be more creative, Nyx. But first, I need to understand something. Why now? You've had plenty of time to kill me. Is there a special reason? Nyx leaned forward slightly, her face illuminated by the shifting neon lights. Killing you wouldn't be fun, Ray's, she murmured. You're far more valuable alive. Ray's held her gaze. Was this just a job offer? Or was it another way of reopening old wounds? Ray's took the last sip of his drink and set the glass down on the table. His gaze lingered on Nyx, but only on the surface. What he was really thinking about was what she was after. I have no interest in being useful to you, Nyx, he said with a cool smile. If you're not going to kill me, you'll need to give me a good reason to accept your offer. And join or die isn't exactly a creative pitch. Nyx settled more comfortably into her seat, tilting her head slightly. A shadow of an old memory flickered in her eyes, but her voice remained just as indifferent. Then let me give you a reason, Ray's, she said, tracing her fingers lightly along the edge of the table. Do you remember that night on Caladan Prime? The smirk on Ray's face visibly faded. His fingers unconsciously brushed against the table's edge. Caladan Prime. Of course, he remembered. It had been a year ago. Back then, Ray's was working a different job there to take down a major theft operation. But halfway through the night, everything had changed. A brutal betrayal had shattered the teams, leaving him barely escaping with his life. And in the middle of all that chaos, a gun had been aimed at his back. Nyx's gun, you see, Ray's, she continued with a smirk. I could have shot you that night, but I didn't. Have you ever wondered why? Ray's took a slow breath. If there's one thing I regret, it's leaving you alive that night, he said coldly. Nyx chuckled softly, shaking her head. Oh Calderon, you're starting to show emotions. It's nice to know I can still read you. Ray's locked eyes with her. Why didn't you kill me, Nyx? Was it just to betray me later, or were you planning for this moment all along? The smirk on Nyx's face faded for a moment. Her expression turned serious just for a split second. Then, just as quickly, she regained her usual composed demeanor. If I gave you that answer now, it would ruin the game, she said. But know this, the fact that you didn't die that night wasn't a mistake. And the fact that you're sitting here right now. Not a coincidence. Ray's narrowed his eyes slightly. Nyx knew something, but what? And the real question, should he still see her as an untrustworthy snake, or was this time truly different? The man took a deep breath, then shook his head. "Nice story," he said. "But I still don't know why I'm here." Nix winked. "Then let me give you the most important detail," she said, leaning in just slightly before whispering. "I know something about you, Rays, and if you don't come with me, that information will end up in the wrong hands." Ray's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, he didn't fully grasp what she meant. But his instincts told him one thing: this wasn't just a job offer. This was personal, and personal things were always far more dangerous. Rays narrowed his eyes, masking his expression with indifference. He didn't want Nix to see that her words had affected him. She had chosen her words carefully, just like she always did. But in this game, she wasn't the only one allowed to bluff. He smirked slightly, tilting his head as he settled more comfortably into his seat. "Well," he said in a mocking tone, "you really think you've got me cornered, don't you? But here's the thing, Nix, I don't know what you're holding, but I do know this: if you really had something important, you would have used it by now." Nix's eyebrows lifted by the slightest fraction. It was barely noticeable, but for Rays, it was enough. He had struck a nerve. "You're threatening me, but I'm not even sure you actually know anything," he continued, lazily stirring the melting ice in his glass with his finger. "Maybe you're just trying to lure me to the table. And if that's the case, you're going to have to try harder." Nix stared at him, eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were a test subject under her scrutiny. Then, tilting her head, she spoke again. "Oh, Rays, you always play the same game," she said, her voice silky but carrying a hint of concealed impatience. "And that's what I love most about you. You always think you're a step ahead, but some games you've already lost before you even realize they've begun." Just then, the club's entrance swung open. The neon lights cast a shadow on the floor before revealing a figure, their silhouette slowly coming into focus. The sound of high heels clicking against the floor was nearly drowned out by the music, but it was enough to catch both Ray's and Nix's attention. The woman was tall, dressed in a shimmering silver dress. Her short, dark blue hair framed a sharp yet striking face. A faint metallic sheen covered her skin, almost as if she had undergone some kind of biotech modification. Her eyes were locked onto their table with unwavering precision. For a brief moment, Nix's smirk froze. Rays caught that flicker of surprise on Nix's face. And that told him something else: this woman was unexpected. As the stranger approached, her voice was cool and precise. "Nix, did you forget to invite me?" Nix recovered quickly, shaking off her surprise. She let out a short laugh and leaned back in her seat. "Oh, dearest Rava, what a delightful surprise," she said. But there was a tension in her voice that Rays didn't miss. Rays turned his gaze to the newcomer. If Nix was even slightly unsettled, then this woman had to be someone important. The woman in the silver dress slowly took a seat, her eyes settling on Rays. "I believe I have a few words to say about this deal as well." The game had just become a lot more complicated. Rays locked eyes with Rava. Her silver dress shimmered under the neon lights, but the cold expression on her face made one thing clear: she wasn't just a spectator here. She was another player, and when the number of players increased, the rules of the game changed. Nix tried to hide her tension, but Rays had known her for years. She didn't want Rava here. That was information he could use to his advantage. Lifting his glass slightly, Rays smirked. "Looks like this night just got more interesting," he said, taking a small sip. "Rava, right, tell me, why are you sticking your nose into our little deal?" Rava tilted her head and offered a slight smile. "Oh, Rays," she said, as if they were old acquaintances. "Who said I was interfering? I simply don't miss opportunities." Nix rolled her eyes with an exasperated sigh. "What do you want, Rava?" The woman crossed her legs and leaned back. "The real question is, what do you want?" A brief silence settled over the table. Ray smirked to himself. There it was, the opening he needed. Rava had her own agenda, but it clearly didn't align perfectly with Nix's. That meant Rays now had another bargaining chip. Taking a deep breath, he leaned back and spread his hands. "All right," he said. Since we're all here, why don't we lay our cards on the table? Let's see what we've got. He tapped his finger on the table and started counting. One Nyx gave me a classic work for us or die offer. I'm sure she had more incentives to sweeten the deal, but then you showed up, Rava, and judging by her reaction, your presence wasn't part of the plan. Nyx's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't deny it. To you, Rava, came here for your own reasons. You sat down at this table because you think there's something worth taking. Which means whatever Nyx is after, it's not just hers, it's valuable enough to attract other interests. Rava gave a small nod, silently confirming his assessment. And me, I'm the only independent player here. Both of you want me on your side, but the funny thing is, neither of you know exactly what the other is planning. Ray's leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, which means, right now, I'm the one with the most advantage. Nyx and Reva both stared at him, tension thick in the air. They knew he was right. Nyx's smirk tightened slightly. I like that you think you have the advantage, Raze, she said, her voice carrying both amusement and warning, but the game is just beginning. Reva traced a finger along the edge of the table. All right then, let's say you do have the upper hand, Raze. The question is, whose side are you on? Raze raised an eyebrow. This was the critical moment. Would he choose a side? Or would he let the tension between the two women build, turning it further to his advantage? A decision had to be made, but maybe not choosing was the best choice. He smiled. Why don't we talk a little more and find out? He said casually. Reva chuckled softly. Nyx pursed her lips, keeping her gaze locked on Ray's. This night was going to be a long one, and the real game was only just beginning. Raze noticed the sly smile on Reva's face, and he found himself entertained. This woman was definitely dangerous, but sometimes danger was the best kind of leverage. Reva turned to Nyx, as if Raze were completely irrelevant. You know, Nyx, it's not surprising that Raze is having trouble deciding. After all, your offer isn't exactly convincing, she said with a slight tilt of her head. A typical join us or die deal, really. Nyx's eyes narrowed, the amused expression on her face freezing into something colder. Did you come here to give me a lesson, Reva? Reva shrugged. No, but I also didn't come here to play by your rules. Then, she turned her attention to Raze, this time truly looking at him as someone worth negotiating with. Raze, I have a simple offer for you, she said, tapping her fingers lightly on the table. If you join Nyx's crew, sure, you'll survive. But you'll spend the rest of your life following her orders. And we both know that's not really your style. Raze remained silent. Keep talking. If you work with me, Reva continued, ignoring the way Nyx was now grinding her teeth, I'm offering you more than survival. I'm offering you the chance to live on your own terms. I don't need a lapdog. I need a partner. Nyx leaned forward slightly in her chair, her voice silk smooth but laced with venom. Work with you, she repeated. You talk big, Reva, but you're forgetting something while trying to lure Raze in. She tapped the table once. My patience is wearing thin, Raze chuckled inwardly. There it was, the reaction he'd been waiting for. Nyx's tone had changed. She had started by trying to recruit him, but now, she was losing interest in the game. That meant she was about to tighten the noose. She locked eyes with Raze. I thought I was doing you a favor. But now I see that when I give you too many choices, you start to get spoiled. Still lounging with one leg draped over the table's edge, she leaned in closer. Listen carefully, Calderon. Either you work with me, or you die here tonight, at this table. And if I kill you here, I'll make sure not even your corpse is found. Reva watched the scene as if it were a stage play, amused. Oh, Nyx, she said with a laugh. Do you think threats make you more attractive? Nyx's gaze snapped toward her. I'm making a deal here. You have no authority to interfere. Reva tilted her head slightly, and a dangerous glint flickered in her eyes. Oh, no authority, she echoed. Then, she stood up, placing both hands on the table as she leaned toward Nyx. Then let me remind you, she whispered, her voice as sharp and cold as a blade. Your bosses. Oh me. And if I want to, I can burn down your little operation in a day. Nix's expression changed just slightly, so subtle that most wouldn't notice. But Ray's did. This wasn't a bluff. Rava actually had leverage over Nix, and the way Nix was restraining herself meant it was bigger than she wanted to admit. Interesting. Ray's exhaled slowly, knowing that this was where things got really fun. But he still needed to decide his own next move. Now, he had to clear options. Push back against Nix's tightening grip. Test her resolve. See just how far she was willing to go if he challenged her directly. Entertain Rava's offer, but not to quickly gather more information first. Find out exactly what she wanted before making any commitments. Ray's let his gaze drift between Nix and Rava. Which game was he going to play? Ray's ignored the anger in Nix's eyes and turned to Rava with a slight smirk. It would be foolish to make a move before figuring out what this woman was really after. Slowly rotating his glass between his fingers, he said, "You talk a good game, Rava." His tone was measured, as if he were weighing the situation. "But you still haven't told me exactly what I'd gain from working with you. If you're just throwing vague words like freedom at me, I'm sorry, but I don't buy it." Rava's eyes narrowed slightly, the corners of her lips curving upward. She was pleased. She had expected him not to take the bait too quickly. That only made her more interested. "I know you're no lapdog, Calderon," she said as she slowly settled back into her seat. "That's why I'm not trying to put a leash on you. But here's the thing, while Nix barks orders at you and only offers you survival, I'm offering you something real, a partnership." Ray's tilted his head. "A partnership, huh?" He mused, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly does that entail?" Rava exhaled lightly, tracing her fingers over the surface of the table. "I'm offering you two things," she said. "First, money, a lot of it. For someone with a bounty on their head, I can guarantee you make far more than whatever you're scraping together right now." Ray's dismissed that with a slight wave of his fingers. Money was always an incentive, but it was the second thing that really mattered. "And the second?" he asked, locking eyes with her. Rava smiled slightly. Here came the real offer. "Information, Rays." Nix immediately reacted. "Bullshit," she snapped. "Rays doesn't need information. He's a bounty hunter, not a goddamn librarian." Rava shot her an amused glance but then turned back to Rays. "I know something about you," she said slowly. "You don't just move to survive. You're searching for something." Rays's expression shifted just barely. It was subtle, but Rava caught it, and so did Nix. Nix scowled. "Stop feeding him lies, Rava. Rays is just a gun. Stop trying to romanticize him." Rava ignored her completely this time. Her focus was solely on Rays. "Tell me, Calderon," she continued. "If you had the chance to learn something about your past, would you really turn it down?" Rays's fingers drummed lightly against the edge of the table. This was dangerous territory. "What do you know about my past, Rava?" he asked, his tone no longer mocking but carrying a quiet edge of danger. Rava smiled faintly. "If I told you everything here, why would you bother coming with me?" She had thrown out the hook. Nix immediately jumped in. "Don't listen to her, Rays," she said, her voice sharper now. "This is a game. She's baiting you. If you go with her, you won't just lose your past, you'll lose your future." Rays narrowed his eyes. There was an unusual panic in Nix's voice. Rays leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet chuckle. "Looks like I've stumbled into something really intriguing," he said. Then, turning back to Rava, he added, "But you know, Rava, just saying I have information isn't enough. If you want me to take you seriously, you'll have to let me taste a little of what you know." Rava blinked once before smiling. "You want a sample?" she asked. Rays nodded. "Otherwise, you're just another hustler selling empty promises." Rava was silent for a few seconds, considering. Then, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "Speaking of Kaladin Prime, do you really think everyone who died that night is actually dead?" Rays's expression shifted just for a fraction of a second, because he had been certain. That night, everyone had died. Nix jumped in immediately. Cut the crap, Reva, she snapped. Everyone died that night. It's over. Reva's smirk deepened. So you think? Now, Ray's had bigger questions. Because if Reva was telling the truth, someone survived. And if that was true, who? Ray's mind was still tangled in Reva's words. Someone survived Kaladin Prime. If that was true, who was it? And why now after all this time? But he didn't have time to think any further. The nightclub's front entrance exploded violently. The metal frame was ripped from its hinges, sending tables and chairs flying. Panicked screams filled the air as patrons scrambled in all directions, and thick smoke quickly engulfed the room. Gunfire erupted, Reva, and Nix instinctively dropped under the table. The neon lights continued to flicker, blending chaotically with the muffled beat of the still-playing music. Nix clenched her teeth. Who the hell are these guys? She hissed. Ray's rolled his eyes slightly. That's your question. Maybe you should tell us who you pissed off this time. Nix. As the smoke cleared, the silhouettes of armed men became visible. They were heavily equipped, and it was clear who their target was. The man leading the group, his face scarred and twisted with rage, shouted in a dark, growling voice. Nix, you screwed up this time. There's nowhere left to run. Nix's expression darkened. Ah shit. Valen's men. Reva swiftly pulled out her pistol and checked the magazine. Valen, well, you really don't know how to pick your enemies, do you, Nix? Nix rolled her eyes. Not the time for moral lectures, Reva. Raze drew his own weapon and checked his rounds. All right, both of you shut up. If we don't get out of here now, you'll both be corpses. Valen's men were shoving patrons aside, kicking over tables, and forcing anyone in their way to the floor. Their eyes were scanning the club for her. Nix, make this easy, step out, or everyone in here dies. Nix muttered a curse under her breath. Bastards. Raze's eyes darted around the room. The exits were blocked. The front entrance was blown apart, but 6 armed men guarded it. The back exit was likely already covered. That left 2 options. Go up to the roof. If they could reach the upper floor, they could escape via the rooftop and disappear into the streets. But getting to the stairwell was risky. Go down to the basement. Most clubs had a service exit below. It wasn't guaranteed to be clear, but it was worth a shot. Raze had to make a call fast. Nix, is there a way out of here? He asked. Nix quickly scanned the area before tilting her head towards the upper floor. If we get to the roof, we can make a run for it. My ship's a few blocks away. Reva frowned. What about the basement? Most clubs have a service exit. Then, one of Valen's men shouted, I'm counting to 3. If you don't come out, we blow this whole place to hell. 3. Raze clenched his jaw. The roof or the basement. 2. Raze ignored Nix's urgent glance toward the rooftop and turned sharply to Reva. We're going for the basement, he said with firm resolve. Nix scowled. Are you insane, Raze? If we get to the roof, we can fly out of here. Raze aimed his gun toward Valen's men and shot Nix a hard look. If we go up, we're sitting ducks. If there's an exit down there, we'll have a better chance of slipping away unnoticed. You can either come with us, or die here. Nix clenched her teeth, hesitating for a brief moment, but she had no better option. Shit, she muttered, then quickly followed after Reva. 1. Just as Valen's men were about to shout 3, Raze lifted his gun and fired 3 shots into the neon lights overhead. Sparks and shattered glass rained down, plunging the club into chaotic disarray. Terrified patrons screamed, diving for cover, while Valen's men instinctively shielded their eyes from the sudden flash. Now, Raze shouted, bolting toward the bar. Reva had already found the hidden door near the bar counter. Here, she called, pulling it open. A dark stairwell led downward. Raze took a quick glance back. Valen's men were still dazed but would recover in seconds. Get inside, he ordered. The 3 of them rushed down into the darkness, slamming the door shut behind them. The narrow staircase opened into a damp, dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stale alcohol. Dust swirled in the low light. This place wasn't used often. Nix, breathing heavily, muttered, I told you this was a stupid plan. Reva rolled her eyes. You're still breathing, aren't you? Ray's raised a hand to silence them. Voices echoed from above. We know they're down here. Check all the doors, Ray's cursed under his breath. They didn't have much time. His eyes quickly scanned the basement. Old wooden crates, metal barrels, and rotting furniture littered the space. But an exit. There, on the left wall, a rusted metal door stood slightly apart from the clutter. The faded paint read service exit. That's it, Ray's said, moving toward it. He pushed on the door. It didn't budge. Locked, he growled. Nick scoffed. Move. She pulled a sleek plasma cutter from inside her jacket and pressed it to the lock. SHZZZZT. Small sparks flickered as the metal sizzled under the heat. A voice shouted from above. They're behind that door. Reva raised her gun. Hurry, Nix. Gunfire exploded from the stairwell. Valen's men were in the basement. Ray spun around, firing 2 quick shots. Bang bang. One of Valen's men cursed as he ducked for cover. Nix, open the damn door. The plasma cutter hissed one last time, and with a final click, the lock dropped to the floor. Nix shoved the door open. It led into a cold, rain-soaked alley. Go, she yelled. Reva darted out first. Ray's fired one last shot to hold Valen's men back before slipping through. Nix was the last to exit, slamming the door behind them and shoving a metal barrel against it. They were free, but not safe yet. Now, standing in the rain, they had to make a choice. Ray's had to decide what next. The cold night air was thick with the flickering glow of street lamps. Light rain drizzled over the pavement, forming a thin layer of moisture that made every footstep echo louder. Nix clenched her teeth. My ship is 3 blocks away, she said. We need to move fast. Ray tightened his grip on his gun and stole a quick glance behind them. Valen's men weren't far behind. Run, he ordered. The chase began. Ray led the way, Nix close behind, and Reva covering the rear as they weaved through narrow alleyways. The neon lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets, painting the puddles in hues of red, blue, and green. The tight corridors were cluttered with overflowing dumpsters, abandoned storefronts, and broken signs. Reva glanced over her shoulder and scoffed. How the hell did you manage this, Nix? What did you do to get an entire gang after you? Nix responded between breaths. I stole a damn shipment. But that's not important right now. We just need to get to my ship. Ray frowned but didn't waste time asking further questions. The only thing that mattered now was staying alive. Finally, as they emerged from a narrow passage, a sleek black attack-class ship came into view. The ship's exterior bore the scars of battle, but its engines were still running. Nix quickly activated her wrist console, and the ship's boarding ramp began to lower. Move it, move it. At the same moment, Valen's men rounded the corner. Ray turned, firing 2 precise shots. Bam bam. One thug collapsed with a curse, while the others dove for cover. Reva cursed under her breath and leapt onto the ramp. This whole thing is getting dumber by the second. Nix spun around. Rays, get inside now. Rays fired one last round before sprinting up the ramp. As soon as he was inside, Nix followed, slamming the hatch shut just as bullets clanged against the ship's hull. The engines roared to life. Nix slid into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. Within moments, Black Mirage lifted off, its thrusters kicking up debris as it shot into the sky. As the city lights blurred into the distance below, Valen's men were left far behind. Nix plotted a complex flight path, careful to avoid restricted airspace. At least until they were sure they were off Valen's radar. Reva crossed her arms and muttered, Great, so now what? We're all on Valen's hit list. Ray silently pulled up the navigation system and input coordinates. There's only one place we'll be safe. My safe house. Nix raised an eyebrow. You have a safe house. Ray smirked. Of course. Only an idiot wouldn't have a backup plan. Nix grinned. All right then, send me the coordinates. We're heading there. After an hour's flight, Black Mirage disappeared into the vast asteroid belt, approaching an abandoned mining station. It wasn't on any official records, just a forgotten excavation site, the perfect hiding spot. As Nix maneuvered the ship closer, Rays guided her. There are basic defense systems inside, but as long as you enter a friendly ID, they won't fire. Reva wrinkled her nose, eyeing the station. This place looks like a junk heap. Reyes remained unfazed. It's safe. That's what matters. Nix carefully brought the ship down into the station's docking bay. As they stepped onto the platform, Reva crossed her arms and sighed. All right, so now Valen's men are after all three of us. What's the plan? As they entered the station, the dim lights flickered weakly. This was an old mining base, long abandoned, but Reyes had repurposed it to his liking. Old control panels, modified weapon racks, and a few makeshift beds were scattered across the space, simple, but safe. The door sealed shut behind them, and without hesitation, Reyes turned sharply, stepping in front of Nix. Now start talking, Nix. She raised an eyebrow. Talk about what, sweetheart? Reyes narrowed his eyes. Cut the act. Someone like Valen doesn't come after you unless you've made a big mistake. What did you steal from him? Nix hesitated for a brief moment, then sighed dramatically before dropping into a chair. All right, since you're so curious, she said, crossing her legs. Reyes folded his arms, while Reva leaned against the wall, silently observing. Nix took a deep breath and met Reyes's gaze. A data chip. Reyes frowned. All this chaos over a chip? Nix shook her head. Not just any chip. It contains every dirty secret Valen has been keeping: financial records, illegal trades, smuggling routes, kidnappings. Everything. If the right people get their hands on this, Valen's entire empire will crumble. Reva let out a dry laugh. Nix, you really outdid yourself. You stole a data chip that could destroy Valen. What was the plan? Blackmail? Nix shrugged. I was planning to sell it to the highest bidder. But things got a little complicated. Reyes stepped closer, his expression hard. Where's the chip now? Nix smirked slightly and reached into her side pocket, pulling out a small black data chip. Relax, I still have it. Reyes extended his hand. Give it to me. Nix raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you plan to do with it, Reyes? Help me, or hand it back to Valen. Reyes stared into her eyes. That was the question, wasn't it? But before he made any decisions about the chip, there was something else he needed to address. He turned to Reva. Now it's your turn. Reva sighed. Oh great, my interrogation time. Reyes stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly. You said someone survived Caladan Prime. Who? Reva didn't answer immediately. The usual teasing expression on her face was gone. She was serious now. Then, after a moment, she lifted her gaze and met his eyes. When you learn this, Reyes, you won't be able to go back. Reyes clenched his jaw. That's my choice. You. Reva took a slow breath, then finally spoke. Your brother. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Nix's eyes widened in shock. Wait, Reyes had a brother. Reyes's face remained unreadable, but something in his eyes cracked. His brother, he had died on Caladan Prime. Reyes had held him as he took his last breath. He had seen it with his own eyes. Hadn't he? But Reva wasn't lying. Reyes's voice was low and steady. How do you know? Reva hesitated for only a moment. It's in Valen's data chip. There's a name, Reyes. Someone with your last name. Reyes inhaled sharply, his fists tightening. If Reva was telling the truth, then everything he thought he knew about his past was a lie. Nix, still processing what she just heard, muttered under her breath, Shit. Reva crossed her arms. So Calderon, she asked. What are you going to do now? Reyes's world had just been turned upside down. Reyes's eyes locked onto the data chip in Nix's hand. Valen's entire empire, his secrets, his crimes were all stored in this tiny device. If used correctly, it could bring everything crashing down. But now, a much bigger question haunted him. His brother. Aiden should have died on Caladan Prime. Reyes had seen it with his own eyes, hadn't he? He took a silent breath and snatched the data chip from Nix's hand. She raised an eyebrow but didn't resist. We're taking Valen down, Reyes said, his voice cold and unwavering. This chip is our weapon. Nix smirked. finally making smart decisions, called her own. But Reva didn't smile. Her expression hardened, her arms crossing as she leaned against the wall, tilting her head slightly. "If you really want to take down Valen," she said, "there's something you need to know, Reyes." Reyes frowned. "What now, Reva?" She hesitated for a brief moment before lifting her gaze. "Your brother is alive." Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence. Reva didn't look away. "Not just alive. He works for Valen." Reyes' eyes gleamed in the dim light. His voice came out low and threatening. "Where did you hear that?" Reva exhaled. "Because I used to do business with Valen's people. I heard his name more than once." Aiden Calderon, Valen's right-hand man. "He's one of Valen's most trusted enforcers. Some even say he's the one who really keeps the Empire running." A cold numbness spread through Reyes' chest. Aiden, the one who was supposed to die that day. The one who didn't. Nix let out a low whistle. "Shit. So that's why Valen is so powerful." He had a Calderon at his side. Reyes closed his eyes for a brief second and took a deep breath. Anger, doubt, emptiness. His entire world had just been thrown into chaos. Reva was still watching him. "If you're serious about taking down Valen, Reyes," she said quietly, "then you better be ready to face your brother." This wasn't just about a data chip anymore. This was blood versus vengeance. Reyes opened his eyes. And now, he had a target. Reyes sat in the cockpit, staring at the holographic map in front of him. Aiden, hearing that name again felt like ripping open an old wound. The brother he thought was dead was now Valen's right hand. Nix and Reva remained silent, watching, waiting to see how Reyes would process this revelation. Without looking up from the map, Reyes spoke. "Where is Aiden now?" Reva considered for a moment before checking her wrist device for recent intel. "He's not at Valen's main base. But the latest reports place him at Calidus Station, one of Valen's biggest illegal trade hubs." Nix leaned back, smirking. "So what's the plan?" "We just walk up to your long-lost brother and say, 'Hey, why aren't you dead?'" Reyes turned his gaze toward her, his expression ice-cold. "If he survived, I deserve to know why." Reva exhaled. "If you go down this path, Reyes, there's no turning back." Reyes gave a small nod. He already knew that. Calidus Station was a floating city of crime, patched together metal structures, rusted corridors, and neon-lit alleys filled with smugglers, mercenaries, and bounty hunters. This was where the shadows ruled. Reyes, Nix, and Reva had tracked Aiden to an abandoned warehouse on the station's outskirts. Reyes took a deep breath. After all these years, he was about to face his brother. They pushed open the door. The warehouse was dimly lit, shelves and crates casting long shadows. And standing among them, clad in black armor, was a tall figure. Aiden Calderon. For a second, Reyes' heart seemed to stop. His brother was alive. Aiden stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold. There was no warmth, no brotherly reunion. "It's been a long time, brother." Reyes clenched his fists. "You're really alive." Aiden tilted his head slightly, an almost amused glint in his eyes. "You thought I was dead, didn't you, left to rot? But I survived. And I became strong." Reyes' breath was steady. "You joined Valen," Aiden smirked. "Wrong, Reyes. I became Valen. I am his right hand. I protect his empire, and if you stand in my way..." He took another step closer. "I'll destroy you." A chill ran through Reyes' veins. This was the truth. "I'm your brother, Aiden." Aiden shook his head slowly. "No, you're just another obstacle." Nix instinctively reached for her weapon, but Reyes held up a hand, stopping her. "One last chance," Reyes said, his voice low, dangerous. "We're taking Valen down. Join us, or stand against us." Aiden let out a quiet laugh. "You still talk like a hero, Reyes, but the truth is, this war is already over. Valen won, and you either stand with us, or you die." Reyes inhaled deeply. "Then this is war." Aiden's eyes narrowed. "Looks that way, brother." At that moment, they both understood there was no going back. Reyes locked eyes with Aiden one last time. His brother was gone. Perhaps there had never been a chance for reconciliation. Aiden had become Valen's man, not just a follower, but his shadow, his right hand, and his most loyal warrior. So Reyes took a step back without a word. There was no point in fighting now. A flicker of curiosity crossed Aiden's eyes. Running away, Reyes frowned. For now, he turned, motioning for Nyx and Reva to follow. They were leaving. Aiden didn't stop them. He was letting them go for now, but that mercy wouldn't last. As they walked out the door, Aiden's voice echoed behind them. "Next time, I'll kill you, brother." Preparing for war, the first move. As Black Mirage drifted away from Kalida's station, the tension inside the ship was thick. Reyes leaned against the cockpit console, lost in thought. He had lost his brother, but maybe he had already lost him years ago. Nyx stretched out on a chair, lighting a cigarette. "Well, this is officially a shitstorm. Valen's men were already after us. Now we have Aiden too." Reva crossed her arms, her gaze locked onto Reyes. "That means one thing, Calderon. We're in a war now." Reyes looked up. "I know." Reva took a deep breath. "So what's the plan?" "Taking down Valen won't be easy. He has an army, resources, and connections. If we're doing this, we need to be smart." Nyx nodded. "I have Valen's financial records. If we play this chip right, we can take him down. But to do that, we need a real plan." Reyes silently considered their options. To defeat Valen, they needed three key things. Intel. Nyx's chip held the secrets to Valen's empire, but they needed to know who to sell that information to. Allies. Valen controlled a massive criminal network. But could they turn his enemies against him? Strategy. A direct assault was suicide. They needed a plan. Reyes finally spoke. "First, we find Valen's enemies." Nyx raised an eyebrow. "Valen's enemies?" Reyes smirked slightly. "Every powerful man has enemies, and the enemy of my enemy is my ally." Reva nodded. "Makes sense, but no one's going to openly fight Valen. If we want allies, we need leverage." Nyx exhaled a trail of smoke. "That's where the chip comes in. If we expose Valen's biggest deals and dirtiest secrets, some people will have no choice but to turn against him." Reyes took a deep breath. The game had begun. As Black Mirage emerged from hyperspace, Reyes' plan was already in motion. The best way to weaken Valen wasn't through brute force, it was by turning his own allies against him. And the stolen data chip Nyx had secured was the perfect weapon to do just that. Reyes stood in the cockpit, staring at the holographic display. Valen's business deals, financial records, and most powerful clients, all laid bare. Nyx leaned back in her seat, studying the screen. "So, what's the play? Do we sell this to someone, or do we leak it straight to Valen's biggest allies?" Reva crossed her arms and nodded. "We need to leak it directly. If we sell it, Valen's people might track us down. But if we turn his own clients against him, he loses everything." Reyes smirked. Exactly what he needed. Expose Valen's illegal trade agreements. If his biggest clients lost trust in him, they'd abandon him, target those controlling his money. Once the cash flow stopped, his forces would start falling apart. Create chaos within the criminal underworld. With the right moves, Valen's empire would crumble from within. As Nyx worked to transmit the stolen data across the galaxy, Reva reached out to Valen's closest allies, gauging which ones were willing to turn on him. And soon, the first cracks began to show. One of Valen's largest clients discovered their accounts had been manipulated and immediately severed all ties with him. Some of his former allies started betraying him from the inside. His mercenaries, realizing they weren't getting paid, began abandoning him one by one. And most importantly, Valen was no longer untouchable. Reyes stared at the holographic map marking Valen's base. "Now, we have the numbers. This is his weakest moment," Reva smirked. "Then let's start the dance." Valen's base was a massive station carved into an asteroid. Once heavily fortified, its defenses had weakened. His own people had begun to turn against him. Reyes and his newfound allies launched the assault. As Black Mirage approached the main entrance, Nyx held the ship steady while hacking into the security grid. Within seconds, the turret defenses were disabled. Ray's checked his weapons and armor. Time to end this. Rava grinned as she loaded her gun. Finally, some real fun, and the battle began. Gunfire echoed through the station's corridors. Ray's moved swiftly, cutting down Valen's remaining forces as he pushed toward the inner sanctum. But just as he reached the doors to Valen's command center, someone stepped into his path. Aiden, their eyes locked. This was inevitable. Aiden drew his gun, but Ray's tossed his own to the ground. This wouldn't be decided with bullets. Aiden raised an eyebrow. Really, Ray's? You want to do this with fists? Ray shrugged off his jacket. If I have to kill you, I'll do it as your brother. After a moment of silence, Aiden tossed his gun aside as well, and the fight began. In the dimly lit corridor, the two brothers exchanged brutal blows. Aiden was strong, a seasoned warrior. But Ray's had learned to survive. Bam! Aiden's fist smashed into Ray's face. He staggered but quickly recovered, driving his knee into Aiden's ribs. They were both blooded and breathless. Aiden dropped to his knees, exhausted. Ray's lifted his gun, aiming it at him. A long silence followed. Ray's finger hovered over the trigger, but he didn't pull it. I'm not going to kill you, Aiden. Aiden scowled. Why, I told you, Ray's, if you stand in my way, I will kill you. Ray's exhaled and lowered the gun. No, I won't kill you, but I will destroy Valen. Aiden sat there, breathing heavily. There was anger in his eyes but also something else, doubt. Ray's took one last look at him. If there's anything left of my brother in you, that's your choice to make. And with that, he left Aiden behind and pushed toward Valen's chamber. Ray's kicked open the door. Valen was waiting. He stood in front of flickering monitors, watching his empire collapse. He knew he had lost. Ray's raised his gun. It's over, Valen. Valen chuckled. Really, Ray's? Kill me, and someone else will take my place. In the underworld, one leader falls, another rises. Ray's smirked. But this time, that leader won't be you. He didn't fire. Instead, he accessed the data Nix had extracted. With a single command, every system in Valen's network was wiped out. His finances, connections, and entire criminal empire were all reduced to nothing. Rava stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Now let's decide who we hand you over to. Valen was finished, and the war was over. As they left the station, Ray's sat in silence for a long time. Aiden was still out there. Maybe he would change. Maybe he wouldn't, but Ray's had spared him, and sometimes that was enough. Nix propped her feet up and lit a cigarette. Well, that's finally over. Rava leaned back. For now, Ray's gazed out at the stars. One battle was over, but the galaxy never stayed quiet for long. But for now, they had won, and as Black Mirage drifted into the endless void of space, a new journey awaited.